Okay, one of the other methodologies for getting a good tune in what I call a problem bow, and we use this a lot with finger shot bows or bows with very poor nock travel. And that's simply adjusting the point weight or the spine of the arrow to make it fly better, okay? And what you'll see is if you take, and typically we're using a bare shaft, or you can use paper, understanding that a bare shaft and paper are the same. But if I'm shooting, say, a recurve bow and my fletched arrows are hitting over here, but my bare shaft is taking off and hitting over here, I know that that's an indicator of a weak arrow, okay? Now, this would signify a left tear. Now, I've had a lot of compound bow setups that shooting triple X's at a 100 spine that shot a left tear. I can promise you they were not too weak, but that's a nock travel issue. But we can make the correction as if it were a weak arrow. So in a situation like this, where I've got a weak arrow and I'm shooting fingers with a recurve, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to take that arrow and I'm going to cut it 1/4 of an inch at a time, okay? And I'll start to see these bare shafts start hit here and here. And you can even go to paper. If I were to shoot this same thing through paper, what I would see is this left tear would go from here, and then maybe it would get smaller, and then it would get even smaller until I got all the vertical out of it, okay? As I cut this thing off 1/4 of an inch at a time, I'm eventually going to get that arrow to come out of that bow, perfectly straight, okay? The reverse can be said in smaller amounts for adjusting point weight, okay? So, for example, once I get close on that reaction, I can adjust my point weight. So, let's say my bare shafts are hitting over here. My fletch shafts are hitting here. Okay? Now let's say I want to move this bare shaft closer, or let's say that's a broadhead. And we covered this a little bit in broadhead tuning. I can simply, because this is weak, that means I got to take point weight out of the front, okay? So maybe I go from a 125 down to 100, okay? That's not going to, in my experience, make a lot of a change, but it's going to move you in that direction. It's easier to think of it the other way. If I have my bare shafts hitting here and my fletch shafts hitting over here, then I can simply start adding point weight until they come together. Now keep in mind, cutting the arrow off is going to be a bigger, faster reaction than adding point weight. Point weight creates resistance on the front of the arrow, okay? And it just basically weakens that arrow's reaction up and changes the way the power stroke of the string, goes down the center line of the shaft. There's a lot of talk in the industry, guys that want to shoot heavy arrows, 200 grain points, 600 grain arrows, okay? This creates a very unique system or setup that is going to require some extra stiff arrows. If you're going to go up to real heavy points, you're going to have to bump up at least a couple spines. And if you understand and look through the rest of the paper tuning, the dynamic spine tuning charts, you'll get a correlation. When I put that 200 grain point on there and I go through and I shoot my 16 tears here on my 4 vein rotations, if I'm getting a lot of variation because I have a 200 grain point in there, I'm either going to have to go up in spine or down in point weight. Okay, point weight has a very big despining effect on the shaft, and I think most setups, a happy medium for most guys is good for hunting. If you're running 370 to 440 grains, that's a good setup. I mean, you can achieve that with a 100 grain point or maybe a 20 grain fact weight if you want. The fact weights you can use to adjust, but these are some other ways that you can tune your bows. I prefer paper tuning as the preferred method. I will use adjusting the shaft on my recurve bows, or if I run into a really problem bow that just will not tune, you may end up having to shoot a weaker arrow out of it. And I don't like when I hear manufacturers saying, well, I got a right tear, you need to shoot a weaker arrow. And I've heard manufacturers say, well, shoot a weaker arrow in a whisker biscuit, 500 spine arrow out of a 70-pound bow, and it shoots a bullet hole. Well, that's a bow manufacturer that's not taking responsibility for their nock travel, okay? What happens though when you shoot weaker arrows, you're going to get a lot of variation when we go into our paper test, okay? It's going to be extremely difficult for you to get all your arrows to shoot same hole accurate, okay? So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. It's important that you kind of draw a happy medium on your setups. For target archery, most outdoor stuff, 120 to 140 grain points adequate. You don't need to go 170, 180. So I hope this tuning series has helped you understand a lot more about the problems that you can encounter in tuning, and then the solutions to correct those problems.